welcome to the Brew. Good morning. Happy Monday. I'm your host, Lex. Today, we are going to take a little bit of a dive into the Options Clearing Corp with Matt Cashman, who is the principal of investor education at the OCC. So we're going to buckle up and take a look at this very important function. Matt's going to tell us all about it. So let's get busy and get ready for that opening.
Hello.
What? Hi, Mal. How are you? Look who we have with us today on Monday. I love having Matt on the show.
I feel like we should just refer to him to his last name because he really does have the coolest name on the screen right now.
He does.
That's a good
Can
one.
we talk about that?
The Cashman.
The Cashman.
Right. That is exactly how I've been referred to in my trading career for the entirety of my trading career for that reason. But
is that right?
Yeah.
Simulation theory is going to have a field day with that one. We are definitely in a game.
Yeah. I like it. First thing in the morning, Molly. I like it.
Yeah, she's a tough one. She's a tough nut, I'll tell you. She's crazy. Matt, how are you, man? It's been a few months since we've done one of these, right?
Yeah. It's been a little while. I'm doing really well. It's been a beautiful summer here in Chicago, and I've been busy though. Lots of options education opportunities out there, as always. Talking a lot about options. That's what I do all the time. So, and I'm really happy to be back to talk either about options or about OCC and OIC in general.
Good.
Whatever you want to talk about, I'm hip to it.
We're definitely gonna grill you. We're gonna put you through the meat grinder today.
I love it.
Yeah. So, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, we're going to try to have you as a representative of the OIC, OCC on fairly regularly on Mondays, right? So not every Monday, but, every other one, every third one thereabouts, which will be great because your background's similar to mine from the trading aspect of it. So you have a lot to offer in terms of education from our floor days, which is always good. And, that's what we're kind of all about. So this will be really fun.
Yeah, and between the two of us, we probably have pretty much all of the grab bag of floor stories covered in some way, shape, or form.
We're gonna, we got to go through a whole show on that. I've got a lot of stories.
We actually, when we were kind of like in the ideation phase of this, I sent you something that was like favorite trading stories from Lex and Matt's floor days as one of the topics. We might just do a full 30 minutes on that because people love to hear those stories. I love to tell them, it was such an incredible place to work for so long. But so between the two of us, I'm sure we can cover whatever as far as that's concerned.
If we could, considering it's the 50th anniversary, Lex, could you tell us your history and your connection to the OCC?
Well, I think Matt knows this too. So my dad Wayne, who's passed. He was one of the original founding members, in this country of the the whole options thing. I think it started, Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, it started out as like CBOT clearing and then went to CBO clearing and then morphed into OCC. I forget all the path, but it was that sort of thing. And my dad was the chairman of OCC for, I think he was running chairman for 43 years before he retired. Wow. Yeah.
Do we call you Prince? Is that too much? No. Do we go? I don't know. Do that?
I believe heir apparent is the correct terminology.
Heir apparent.
Heir apparent. Not at all. No. It's quite the organization, and Matt will tell us about it. So it's pretty cool what they did. Well, and I'm not going to use certain words. I swear to God, I'm not using certain words to describe it. No,
there's a few words.
Get them out of my head.
I'm going to bleep you.
You're going to bleep me. All right, let's get busy. We have so much time. All right, Matt. So. First, give us a little history of you real quick, and then let's get into, my first question is obviously going to be, what is the OCC, the Options Clearing Corp? Let's start there. Let's first learn about Matt, and then learn about what the OCC is. And I know we're going to have tons of questions off of that, those two things. So have at it. Yep. Yeah.
So you and I have very similar backgrounds as far as our professional lives are concerned, right? I started trading in 1998, 1999. I've always been an options trader. I started on the floor of the CBOE right around that time. It was obviously the run up to the .com top. It was an incredible time to be involved in the marketplace, but that's when I first started learning about and trading options. So I started in 98, 99, and I've been an options trader ever since. During that time, I've done a whole host of different things, but the majority of all of my trading has been options based and mostly implied volatility based. I'm a vol trader. And so while I don't do that actively now because, I'm prohibited from trading anything that the OCC clears, which is basically everything. We'll get to that in a moment, obviously. What I've done since 2015, I took some time off and, transitioned away from actual actively taking risk and trading the markets. But for the last couple of years, I've been the principal of investor education at OCC. And so what that means is that I go around and do things like this and webinars and videos and, online things as well as in-person presentations all about options. And what I do is I teach how the actual options work, how the optionality itself works. And most of the time we're talking about the generalities of optionality and not the specifics of I'm not a registered investment advisor, so I can't answer specific questions about your Tesla position and what you should do with it, right? I have very specific ideas about what I would do with it as a trader, but I can't really, in an official capacity, say those things. So what I like to do is teach about how markets and how the options work in a general form, and then allow people to kind of utilize that knowledge to make more informed option trading decisions on their own. So that's really, I've been a trader for 25 years, but for the last 2 years, I've worked at OCC as the principal of investor education, doing things like this, which is why I'm here today.
Cool. Yeah. Cool. Molly, what do you got? That's quite the background, huh?
Yeah, I see that you're not allowed to trade, but I will be watching your parents' accounts, so I'll see what they're trading. I've seen too many movies, Matt.
Go on. Take a look. It's all my life is an open book.
Right. And although you're not supposed to give, direct advice, you can take Matt to drinks and so that he has a plausible plea later.
That's right.
He was under the influence.
Oh yeah. So Matt, I've got the same disclaimers, I think, not investment advice. And I always want to give investment advice.
Yeah.
But I don't.
Well, that's the hard part.
Yeah.
Right?
You just start out by saying, this is what I would do.
Yeah, exactly. There are so many times when in my brain, my trader brain is saying something very specific about what I would say when I was a trader. Because when I was a trader and when I was a partner at an index shop, I was the partner who was in charge of teaching all of the clerks and the new traders how to trade. Right. And so I have a very specific educational style when we're talking about things like that, which is why would you sell those? What are you doing? That kind of thing. Well, none of that is in my vocabulary anymore. More so now, it's this is how these calls work when the stock rallies, generally speaking, right?
Generally speaking.
And so there's a lot of that now, which is good. But I've successfully deprogrammed that trader side of my brain for the last 2 years. So.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And you and Lex have had incredible experiences. So would you say that that's a lot of learning and expensive learning that speaks to you as an educator?
Yeah, absolutely. The goal, what I love to say about what I've done is I've made every mistake in the world as far as trading is concerned. And I've done it with my money and other people's money. I worked as a sole prop for a while, trading my own book. And then I worked at, a huge firm like DRW for a while and traded, Don Wilson's money basically, and made a bunch of mistakes along the way, doing all of these things in different iterations. And those are really expensive lessons. And the ones that you inevitably learn best are the ones that are the most expensive lessons. Right. And from an educational perspective, it's a lot of deep kind of knowledge. And I love to leverage all of that because I have made all of those mistakes. And theoretically now I can kind of educate with those behind me. And so the people that I'm talking to don't necessarily have to make them themselves.
That's awesome. Yeah.
I was just going to say one more thing that, on the flip side of the expensive learning, options has all of these opportunities of protected puts that you can really you can increase the safety of your trading as well.
Yeah.
So for a new trader coming out there, take a look at options because it's not as scary as that, but it can be. So be educated, be safe.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's one of the things that we always talk about when we present things from the OIC's perspective, from the OCC's perspective. Our job is to educate people as to the risks and the benefits of exchange traded options, right? And for a long time, they were thought of as, especially after 2008, right? There was an entire narrative that got out there. They were called weapons of mass destruction for a long time, right? I mean, it's completely ridiculous. But part of what we do, right? Part of even what I do now is, in a sense, deprogramming that narrative from the actual idea of how these things work, because they're just they're leveraged, but they're just financially leveraged instruments. That's all they are. It's just math, right? And as long as you understand the math behind them, then you can do all kinds of amazing things with them. They're so variable, like you can hedge in so many different ways. And that's part of the reason why options, that the volumes that we're seeing exploding over the last 10 years, right? That it's part and parcel because of the fact that people, I think, are starting to wake up to all of the different ways you can use them, right? They're so flexible from a utilization and a portfolio hedging perspective. It's incredible. So I agree completely with that, and that's part of what I do on a daily basis, right?
Yeah, well, you guys have done a great job too, so it's been awesome. Let's start from the beginning real quick. OCC, tell us what it is. What is the vital importance of this entity, the Options Clearing Corp? And I'm going to have tons of questions on on the heels of your explanation here.
All right. So technically, what OCC is, Options Clearing Corporation, is the world's largest equity derivatives clearing organization. Started in 1973. And really what that means from the perspective of someone who's sitting at home trading is that if you are trading an equity or an index option in the United States, OCC's hands touch that contract somewhere along the line, whether it be settlement or clearing. And what it really means is that OCC is the centralized clearing facility that sits in between two people that are trading all the time on a marketplace. So Lex or Molly, if you and I were trading in a pit, or let's call it in a virtual pit, right, on a screen, what's really happening is when you go to lift an offer, if it's offered at $5 and you say, I want to pay, $5 on 200 contracts, and that trades, what's actually happening is that the OCC is the seller to the buyer, and at the same time, they are the buyer to the seller. And what that does is it creates a centralized counterparty where the exchange of risk is centralized within one organization. And so instead of me being immediately involved with risk transference to you, Molly, who, maybe sold me the contract, and then when I want to exercise it, I have to make sure you have enough money in your account to cover the assignment that you're inevitably going to get. OCC, being the centralized clearing facility, covers all of that from the center of that trade, meaning that the person who is exercising that contract with OCC, and the person who is getting assigned from OCC. And so it removes the counterparty risk that exists between two traders. Yeah.
Right. So when to be clear though, when I send in instructions to exercise, an option that I'm long,
yes,
I usually do it through my, whoever my broker is or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Then at the higher level, that broker sends those instructions over to you guys ultimately. And it's not exactly like if Molly and I make the trade, she's short the option, I'm long. When I exercise, she's not necessarily getting assigned. Is that correct? Isn't there a wheel of some kind? I don't know if they still call it that.
Yeah.
But it's a random thing that happens, right?
Yes, and it's random at two different levels that are important to understand. The interesting part about this is that when, if you think about optionality and how it works, when you're long the option, you actually have paid for the right to exercise that option. And if you're short the option, you are getting paid by the amount of premium that you collect when you sell it, but you're incurring the obligation to make that contract whole when the person assigned or the person exercises that option. That doesn't necessarily mean that those two people are always meeting during the assignment and exercise process directly because of this centralized facility. Now, the actual randomization of that process is that when someone exercises a contract, if you're long it and you exercise it, it goes through a couple of different steps. It goes through your brokerage, then it goes from your brokerage to your clearing member firm. It goes from the clearing member firm to the OCC. And that's where the actual OCC's relationship exists with the clearing member firms, is we have a bunch of relationships with clearing member firms who in turn have relationships with trading and brokerage firms who in turn have clients. And so the actual process is it gets exercised. The exercise notice comes in through that entire pipeline, comes up to the OCC. It gets aggregated in this kind of soup of how many people are exercising. And then there's a randomized process through a random algorithm where long positions and short positions, or exercising positions and positions that are going to be assigned, get matched at the OCC level. And that's a randomized process. So no one knows how that's going to happen or when it, like who's going to be assigned. Then it goes out the door in an assignment, the opposite direction, same exact way, but in reverse. Goes to the clearing member firms, who then tell their brokerage firms and trading firms. Now, the interesting part is this is the second randomized part of it. Generally speaking, trading and brokerage firms have their own randomized process, because if you think about it, if they have 200 clients that all have Apple calls on the 200 strike that are all being assigned, they have to figure out which one of their clients are going to be assigned. And so they have their own randomized process, generally speaking, that gets sent out to their clients as to they get assigned on a certain number of contracts, and then they have to figure out which one of their clients gets assigned. And so many times when people are asking questions of us as to like, am I sure that I'm going to be assigned? You have to go through the process of explaining how that works as to the pipelines that are behind the actual scenes for all of this, because the answer is, I can't tell you whether or not you're going to get assigned. And, there's two randomized processes that are at work behind the scenes. And if there's, generally speaking, there are times when you're very likely to be assigned, meaning, if your contract is 100 delta and it's been in the money for 6 months, most of those are going to get exercised, and they're probably going to be assigned if you're short them. But I can't tell you for sure. And your brokerage firm may not actually be able to tell you for sure either. That's the interesting part about this, right? So, and I have lots of stories about, I can tell you a really interesting story some other time about when you're short contracts that are very deep in the money, and the person on the other side who has a lot of the open interest forgets to actually exercise them in an environment where there's no automatic exercise. Things get really interesting.
I would never say that. Yeah, I would never say that that's a problem. I think I played that legal game back in the day.
Yeah, that was there are lots of stories about that. That thankfully, from the OCC's perspective, we have a process called X by X, which means it's oh boy, I can't believe I can't. It's exercise by exception, which means that if your contract meets a certain threshold, usually it's 0.01, so a penny. If it is within 1 penny, if it's in the money by 1 penny, and it's part of the X by X process, which a majority of the contracts are, it will be automatically exercised for you, so that you don't have to, right? When if you're long deep in the money calls and they're in the X by X process and they're in the money by more than a penny, generally speaking, they're going to be automatically exercised. So you don't have to worry about exercising them manually yourself. The story that I have is when someone had a bunch of those calls and didn't exercise them in an environment where they were supposed to manually exercise them. And that gets really sticky and very strange.
But early exercise though, Matt, when we talk about early exercise, the calls are going to be for dividends, that sort of thing, right? There's no X by X for that. that has to be a manual process still, right? Unless things have changed.
Yeah, early exercise, the X by X process is the process by which things get automatically exercised on their expiration date. At the time that they are at the time that the contract expires. Early exercise, what you're talking about, is something where it's incumbent on the actual end user, the investor, to make a decision as to whether or not they want to actually exercise their contract early. What you're talking about is the dividends situation, where potentially you have to remember, in dividends, if you own stock, you are entitled to the dividend if you're long the stock. If you own calls, you are not entitled to the dividend. Only shareholders are entitled to be paid dividends. And so what really has to happen, if you own calls and you actually want to own the stock, you have to exercise your calls before the X date, before the actual company itself takes a picture of their books on the record date and says, these are our shareholders, these are the people that are owed the dividend. If you own calls but you don't own stock, you're not getting paid the dividend. And so the actual early exercise generally happens when people need to convert their, for instance, long call position into a long stock position in order to get paid the dividend. Because if you own the calls, you don't get paid the dividend. If you own the stock, you do get paid the dividend.
Yeah, and there's some gymnastics around that in the trading community that you can do some spreads and what have you for skipping out on the dividend. Molly, do you have a question?
I'm gonna go. So you talk about manual trading, and I'm going to ask this very gently, so you can sidestep it if you'd like. But when you're shorting a stock, is there 100% always a matched borrowed stock against that? And how does that relate to regulation SHO and X clearing and all that? And so gently, we just sidestep that one if you'd like.
That could be a DTCC.
Yeah. I will say, Molly, if that was a gentle way to ask that question, I'm not sure. I want the non-gentle version of it.
Sorry, I was trying not to say the word. Yeah.
I would have to answer that from in an official capacity. The OCC doesn't clear the actual stock, right? It's so how to answer this. I'm going to say that when you are short selling stocks, it is important for you to understand what your risks are from your own book's perspective. Now, what that means is that your brokerage firm is going to charge you whatever they're going to charge you as per your actual agreement with your brokerage firm. That generally is commensurate with the amount of risk that they think they are taking on by having open short positions. And generally speaking, when people are shorting stocks, there are the other side of that stock does exist somewhere, right? And the process of loaning that stock back and forth is something that's slightly opaque from that perspective. And so I'm going to sidestep that one a little bit.
And this is going to be really great. So we're going to have Matt, and that was very camouflaged, so no one will know what that is. But this is really neat because Matt will come on often. Hopefully, I hope you come back after that question.
Yeah.
And so we are going to, you speak about education, and it's really neat because these are complicated issues. But you also talked about really also covering the basics, expiry, and how your choices towards expiry start to diminish, and not only covering the complicated stuff, but also going back to the beginning and the roots to make sure people trade safely. Can you speak a little bit on that?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great segue, and that's something that we do.
I pulled the parachute. Yeah, I had that ready just in case.
Well, yeah, I love it. I love it. That's what we do. That's what I do on a daily basis, right? That's my job, is to actually educate people as to how these contracts actually work. And I'm like passionate about that in a weird way.
I can tell.
I've been doing that forever, and what I love about my job is that I get to take all of, what we talked about at the beginning. I've made all those expensive mistakes. I get to take all of that leveraged experience and pour it into this pitcher where I get to fill up everyone's glass with education. The whole idea behind it is that I want people to understand. And this also is something from the official capacity at OCC and OIC. We want people to understand as thoroughly as possible the options market that is in front of them. And part of what happens when someone walks into an options marketplace that's not educated as to how the contracts themselves work is that inevitably these contracts, like I said before, are leveraged financial instruments, and they're not always immediately understandable from a layperson's perspective. Sometimes there's some complicated math going on, especially in situations like what Lex referenced earlier, dividend plays, right? Dividends where stocks are about to pay dividends. Options get priced in different ways when dividends are present and when they're not present. And so you'll see in a situation certain calls that actually include the dividend or include the possibility of exercising them to receive the dividend, right, and another call that's right next to it that may be priced in duration wise after the ex-div date that doesn't include that possibility, and they have completely different pricing structures, right? And so that can be something that's very complicated from someone who doesn't understand what's going on to walk in and say, well, this call looks incredibly quote unquote cheap relative to this call. What's going on? I'm going to buy this one, right? And then they buy it and they can't, there's no dividend in it. And all of a sudden, and so that's my job. My job is to say, listen, this is how this works. You're going to run into this. Inevitably, you're going to run into this. This is how it generally works. Now go forth and figure out where those pockets are for you and where those options align with your investment thesis and where they might not, right? Lex, you had a question.
Yeah, so I do have a question. God, I have so many questions. So that we'll do a whole show on the dividend thing. I think you and I did a piece a while back that was really good. And one of the things I notice dealing with the retail segment of the world nowadays is they're very confused as to why they got assigned on calls, especially around dividend time. And, I get a lot of questions about that. So that's something we can cover in another show. But it's definitely something that folks need to understand, right? And there's ways out of it. You can roll that. You can buy it in and sell out something else. There's all kinds of things you can do. But we'll get into that another time. Yeah. So that is definitely a very often asked question.
And Lex, question on dividends. So just for someone who's just jumping in, dividends is this a correct analogy? Just a slice of the profits. And you can think of wanting to be in a position while dividends coming out is like musical chairs. When the music stops is when that, extra little cash flow comes in and people want to actually own the stock on that day. And so it's a bit like musical chairs. Is that a good analogy or a really bad one?
I'll let Matt answer that.
All right. Yeah, Matt.
Matt
here.
Matt, Cashman, can you speak directly into the microphone, please? I think that's an adept analogy to it. The part I don't like about it is the musical chairs part where
that's my best piece.
I've been working on this all weekend. The part I don't like about it is the musical chairs part, which implies a certain amount of random kind of you don't know what's going to happen, and oh God, the music just stopped, because it has a little bit of a negative connotation to it. What I would prefer is I love the fact that what you mentioned is that it's a big piece of pie from a corporate perspective that then gets chopped up into tiny little, shareholder pieces that then gets paid out to the shareholder. If you are long options, or if you're short options, right? If you're long it, you've paid for the right to convert that into an underlying stock position of some kind, whether it be short or long. If you're long calls, you've paid for the right to convert that into a long stock position. If you're long puts, you've paid for the right to convert that into a short stock position. Both of those can be useful in a dividend situation in different ways. But the important part about it is that you understand how the actual dividend process works and the timeline with which you need to do that, because there's several different days, right, that are involved. There's the X date, there's the record date, there's the payable date. Those are all really instructive pieces of this process that people need to actually understand from an educational perspective to be able to make that decision and be able to actually convert their options into stock positions when they want to, because that's really what you've done. If you've bought those options, you've bought the right to do that. Now, the flip side of the coin is if you've sold those options, you've incurred the liability or the obligation to make those contracts whole when the other person decides to actually exercise. But if you understand the actual timeline of those dates, you can make a better decision as to whether or not you want to be short that option or whether or not you want to be long that option, right? That's the whole, from my perspective, from the educator's seat, that's the whole point, right? Is saying, this is how this works. Now make sure you utilize this knowledge when you're looking at like whether or not you want to buy that call, right? Like that's the important part from my perspective. But I think the analogy is close. Yes, I think that's really what it is, basically.
Molly just likes the music part. That's all. She likes the whole music thing.
I'm in Hollywood.
So let me ask this: OCC is this centralized, organization, right?
Yes.
It sounds like it is really, really important. Therefore, if it's really, really important in the world of finance, it needs to have money behind it.
Yes.
Right? So how does OCC account for, and again, we don't need specifics, but account for, funding? The clearing members have to post money with you, I'm assuming, right? Yes. And then, so what I'm getting at is I remember a time way back when, it was probably around 87, or maybe the one after that, the crash after that, there's some issues out there. And OCC can be at risk if the clearing members don't have enough money posted and there's, risk, right? So right. You guys have figured that out. I know that, but it's an important function now to the point of can't fail kind of deal, right?
Yeah, we're really drilling Matt this morning on cap requirements. Now, poor guy.
No, I don't need specifics. I know he's like I can't believe Lex asked me. I can't talk about that.
No,
Bueller.
I'm talking about those things. They are certainly a part of. I think the most important part here is the part where you said OCC has figured that out, right? Because there's multiple teams of people whose job it is specifically to analyze the risk and analyze what we have on our centralized clearing books, right, as risk that exists for OCC, and make sure that the amount of capital that's held in this kind of centralized risk waterfall that is there from all of the clearing member firms is enough to cover all of that. And there are obviously, we are what's called a systemically important financial market utility. It is a lot of words, right? We shorten it to SIFMU, SIFMU. There's only a few of them out there. And that happened as a result of, some of those events that you talked about, like 1987 and 2008, right? The federal government decided that there were things that were going to be called systemically important financial market utilities. What that means is that these things need to be functional even when things are crazy, is essentially what that means. And so what that means from our perspective is that the SEC and the CFTC and the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System have oversight over what we do to make sure that there's enough clearing firm money in that risk waterfall to make sure all of those theoretical default risks are covered on a minute-by-minute, day-by-day, week-by-week basis to afford enough of that kind of like clearing member, cushion that's in there on a daily basis. Interesting piece of information is that there's last year, I think there was roughly $13 billion of clearing fund held at year end, right? Which is $13 billion of just money that's sitting there that is designated in that risk waterfall to make sure that it's covered, right? Yep. And $180 billion of margin held at year end, of 2022, right? Those are that. So there's a couple of different levers, right, that OCC has that they pull and push, just like any clearing firm has with their actual members, right? And that is, we can change the amount of margin that we require people to hold in order to hold these positions over time. And that number, moves up and down as the market moves up and down. And there's lots of variable pieces of that. But what's important is that there's a ton of people that work on that from the OCC level because of the fact that we are a SIFMU that has a very long list of regulatory requirements that we fulfill on a daily basis.
Right. Right. Interesting. So do you set the margin policy for individual clearing members? Or is that something that is, I don't know, suggested in the clearing members overlay another level of risk for their clients?
We set margin policy for our direct relationships with our direct clearing member firms.
Okay.
And so we require a certain amount of clearing funds that are held in that centralized clearing fund to cover risk. Now, inevitably, that filters down to questions that I get on a daily basis on the investor education desk about what people's actual margin requirements are from the end user's perspective.
Right.
And that is a completely and totally different relationship. From the end user's perspective, your relationship is with your trading and brokerage firm, who then has a relationship with, a clearing member firm, who then has a relationship with OCC. The OCC part of it is with just that first level that I just talked about, which is OCC to the clearing member firms. And then the other relationships are with clearing member firms, trading and brokerage firms, and then inevitably with the end user and their trading firm. Each level of that has their own set of margin requirements and cash requirements to cover risk. And it's incumbent upon all of those different people to manage their own operational risks by moving their own levers, right? Of how much margin, what does it cost to carry short stock on this stock, right? Those things all get kind of tweaked and turned at different levels. But our relationship with OCC is with our clearing member firms. And those are the relationships that we actually dictate as far as the amount of margin that is held.
And I think that's why Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX had that on the table to do their own clearing. And I think that was the debate on that in the end of the day, that it was too close.
Yeah. Well, I think that's an interesting debate. I'm someone who looks a lot at the crypto world, and I think that there's a lot of really interesting innovations there that are in that fintech space that eventually will be utilized even all the way up to the clearing level of how our system works. But it's going to take time, and it's going to take a lot of different iterative processes along the way, especially when you're dealing with something that is as highly regulated as a SIFMU, like OCC.
Right.
We have regulatory requirements for all of those acronym, organizations I listed before, and all of those have to be fulfilled on a daily basis. And in order for all those things to be fulfilled on a daily basis, and to think about okay, how do we design this to also make it as future-proof as possible, right? Because the actual clearing facility and the clearing system is an old system. There's a lot of legacy parts of that system, and the clearing is kind of it's a patchwork of different things that have been put together over time. And that's not a bad thing. If you look at the metric, right? OCC cleared 10 billion contracts last year. That's 40 million contracts on average day. On any average Wednesday, there's 40 million contracts, more than 40 million contracts going through the door and being cleared seamlessly most of the time by OCC. So I don't want anyone to take that out of context. It is a patchwork system because it has, it has needed to be that over time. And it's an iterative process in and of itself. My point is that from a technological perspective, as things start to kind of innovate in that space, it's going to take a little while. But I think that the clearing side of things, just like the banking side of things, is going to eventually be something that is just through supply and demand is going to need to use those innovations in things like clearing, because it frees up capital on a minute by minute basis, right? How much more, how much, like the utilization of capital becomes so much more frictionless, right? And efficient when you're able to do something like that versus like, okay, how many days do I have to wait until this thing gets settled, right?
And if clearinghouses were put on some sort of blockchain technology, and you had increased transparency because the volume is so massive. How does, with transparency, how would someone watch? So there's a balance of, sure, you have transparency, but how do you even dive into something like that? And you can have analytics and all that. But it's a really interesting topic. And, I think Federal Reserve is still written on COBOL, which is ancient hackable.
Well, hold on. When I worked for the OCC in between college semesters, which was 150 years ago, I remember helping out with the batch file. Remember those little computer cards, Matt? And I remember sending those beginning of day, end of day EODs, and watching people show me how to do it. I'm just punching these in. That's how it was. It wasn't probably as nearly electronic as it was then.
So Lex, we'll have to show you after the show. Well, we should have had it up here, but we have someone on one of our shows, Kirk from Option Alpha, and he has one of those, and we had him take a picture for you.
Oh my gosh!
So for the front and the back, it's red and black.
Yep.
So you're on another show. We're gonna bring that up. You'll have to tell us.
That's what we used to do. Yeah. And we brought a volume, 10.38 billion contracts in 2022. Yeah. So Matt, do you remember back when we were trading? I mean, that we weren't even anywhere close to 40 million a day. I can't remember the number. I want to say 10 million.
Yeah, 10 million was like 2008. I think 2008 was like 4 billion contracts or 4.5 billion contracts. Right. Which I remember. I was standing in the SPX pit, looking at the end of year volume numbers and thinking, I'm never ever going to see that many contracts go through this process again. Right? I'm never going to see. Remember what 2008 was like? It was bananas, right? It was completely bananas all the time. And so that's really, I think, instructive as to when you look at that, the volume numbers back then at the most, like the most volatile and craziest thing we had ever seen was half of what it is now on a regular year. And so, and that's just in options, right? That's just in the options market. So, as that process iterates and gets better and better and better, it does that. It gets better and better and better. I think that there are potential technological advances that are going to get layered on top of it, just like other things have been layered on top of it previously to allow us to go from possibly 10 billion to 20 billion, right? That's the next kind of, from the options traders perspective, from the options educators perspective, that's what I want to see. I want to see everyone using options on a daily basis because of how variable and how amazing they are as to how you can hedge risk with them. It's incredible what you can do with them.
Yeah, so, and that's a great point too, because I am on the same, I don't know if it's a warpath, but for me, it's a warpath. I'm on the education warpath with options. Well-educated users of that product stay around forever. Yep. Right. They know how to use it. They know the power of it. They know where to step away from it. I think it's huge. And I think, this whole internet educator sort of thing that's really blossomed over the last several years. People are learning how to use this product. I think it's been awesome. It really is something else.
And Lex brings up a good point. The internet education deal is really decentralization of information. So you don't have 6 channels on your TV anymore. I think South Africa still does. So they're catching up. But why I get up and breathe every day is I would love the same decentralization of the ownership of the world. So, all of our favorite companies, when you go to Starbucks, you can, buy not only a cup of coffee, but a fractional share, and you don't need to, and you can do it with your friends, and you can start really, that will change the mindset of, evil corporations. And then when you become an owner of that corporation, you become an advocate for that, and because you want them to do well, so you do well, and it becomes an involvement. I really would love to see that.
Well,
This is Molly the libertarian right now.
I love it. I love it.
No. And by the way, I'm not saying spread wealth in any way. I'm saying it can be centralized in a great company, but that everybody's involved deciding who the good and bad players are.
Yep.
Yeah.
And also think about this, right? When you become an owner of a company like that, you're not only an advocate, but you're also theoretically part of the decision-making process.
Ooh.
How that works and how those companies make those decisions, right? And you know, in however way the technological part of it actually leverages that process, right? There's all kinds of, you know, the decentralized ways that the DEXs and things like that, and people, right, like the voting process and things like that are available on Ethereum and smart contracts and all of that. That is incredible, and it actually does that very thing in multiple different layers of that process, right? You are an owner, you are an advocate, you are also part of the decision-making process. And my point from an educational perspective is the more that people understand how these things work, the better decisions they're going to make that align with what they think, right? Like, I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'm here to tell you how the contracts work. And then when they line up with how you think about what's going on, I want to use them, right? And that's right. The decentralization of the knowledge behind these products is what's really, really vital to that process in my estimation.
Yeah, no, that's good. So we're gonna have to run here in a second, Mal. You don't get Matt all day. Your time's almost up here.
I'll just leave one last incentive. So this is really neat. So even becoming an owner of a company, I know Lex can't shut me up. So you become an owner of a company, you get discounts, and you can, you know, I went into Best Buy to get something for, you know, a light or something in front of me. And you can talk to the guy on the floor, and he knew months before the retail reports came out that people were not buying the bigger items because of interest rates. The floor guy. So you can actually go boots on the ground and inspect some of these companies and really start to be involved in the decision making, which is so neat. Yeah.
That just leads to an option spread once you figure all that out. You realize that, right, Mom?
Right. It does. And that's where Lex is incredible, because it's great to know about information, but Lex then just sends it home with a strategy of how you can actually get in. And it's just makes us this nice trifecta.
So 2 things left, Matt. Then we're gonna see Matt a lot in the future. But a question, and then we're gonna take a peek at the markets after the question. So who owns OCC?
Technically, OCC is owned by its participant exchanges and participant clearing members, right? It is owned. We are a market utility that is owned by the market participants, essentially. And OCC is a corporation that actually then hosts within it OIC, which is where technically I work, which is a non-for-profit, which is the educational arm that's actually inside the OCC. So, you know, OCC is owned by the people that clear through it, essentially. And those are our clearing firms.
Yep. Cool. Good. Let's have a quick look at the markets, Matt. I'm going to get Matt's comments on this. You're going to see it. Can you see this?
I can.
Okay. What would you say about this little snippet on a Monday morning in the middle of August? I mean, it's kind of fun. The NASDAQ's up pretty good, right? It's 1% and change.
Yeah.
S&P's looking nice. So yeah, it's not bad.
I mean, the thing that I think of when I look at this is that I haven't. So I don't watch the markets nearly as closely as I used to, but every time I look at it, the SPOOs are close to 4,500.
SPOOs.
You know,
the SPOOs. I educated Molly on what the SPOO means.
We're allowed to use that terminology, right? We haven't completely.
Oh yeah. Right.
Okay. Yeah. And then the other thing that I look at when I see this is that oil is, you know, in a different place than it used to be. But I noticed that when I drove down to St. Charles this weekend and filled up my gas tank, and it was a little higher than it normally was.
Yeah, that's for sure.
And then
that's about how I look at oil too, Matt. Same way. Except I drive a Tesla, so.
You?
Yes, of course I do. I'm like one of those greeny types. No, I'm kidding.
I love it.
I'm not.
And then the other thing I look at is the VIX, right? I mean, that's a that's in a different spot than it was. I remember looking at it, 6 weeks ago, and wondering if we were going to go under 13 or 14 or whatever it was.
Yeah, it's bounced a little bit. We had a rough week or so. Down moves, but I would still say this is all very mild and tepid. It's not interesting stuff yet. I don't.
Well, we're still in summer, right? I mean, these are summer markets, right?
Yeah, for sure. But volume's still very good. To your point, I mean, I'll tell you what. I'm excuse me. I'm shocked over the daily volume in the middle of August has been a great month for us, and it's insane. It's August. You never say August is a great month in the same breath. Yeah. Right. In options because of this. It's a summer thing, and it's just been amazing.
Yeah. Well, that's a story. That's a narrative that exists within the volume numbers more broadly over the last however long, 2 years, 3 years. We've been wondering, was this just a bump that is going to, be a peak that looks like this, where 10 billion is the top, and then we're back down to 9, 7, 8 billion.
Yep.
We're not seeing that at all. And we're also not seeing that on a month over month basis. We're seeing these monthly volume numbers get sticky at these elevated levels that previously, if you were to ask me 3 years ago, if we would clear, 40 million contracts a day in the middle of July, I would be like, no, there's no possible way.
No possible way,
right? It continues to happen, and we see these month over month increases that are sticky, and it's just continuing to be sticky. The volume.
Yeah, it is amazing. So we're gonna have to run, but we're gonna tackle you on zero DTE and what all that means. We're gonna get into that down the road, but that's a good topic as well. I'm super interested in that.
Yeah, that's a great topic, and there's lots of people talking about it, and it's fantastic.
Yep.
Mom, and before we go, I just wanted to do an official thank you to Wayne, 50-year anniversary, to Lex's dad, father, and that's a big deal.
That is a big deal. That's a big deal.
We're setting us up.
Lots of events and parties and celebrations this year because of it. And in looking at all of the materials that go along with that, going back and looking at what this looked like in 1973 is absolutely incredible, right?
Oh my
it's
God.
Incredible what has happened to this organization and the market more broadly over the last 50 years. It's absolutely mind blowing.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think back when my dad, was involved at the beginning, they were hoping to get 10,000 contracts a month or something like that, some goofy small number.
Wow.
And I think it eclipsed that. I think they did maybe 10,000 in a day, and they're like, "Whoa, we're on our way! 10,000 in a day. Here we come."
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, that's a light year ago. So
yes,
great, Matt. Well, thanks for coming on. I know we're going to do many more of these. You're a wealth of information. We have a lot of topics to cover over the next century together. So
it's
good. And Matt, Matt's such a great educator. Where can someone go find your education?
Oh, great. I love that.
How do they get access to you?
Molly, thank you so much.
Molly, getting the plug. She's getting a plug. Woo!
So there's two things, right? There's two places that I want you to take away as far as this is concerned.
Secretly, I'm going to go there right after this call.
You are welcome, just like everyone else is.
Okay.
So,
all right.
Optionseducation.org is the actual OIC website where we host all of our videos, webinars, podcasts, and all kinds of information about options. It's an entire suite of educational materials, all of it based on options. And some of it is very elementary, all the way up to some far more sophisticated stuff that we're doing about, the relative value and kurtosis and like skew, things like that. Topics that don't necessarily always get covered. But you can also find covered call calculators and very, very rudimentary ideas about how do these things work. Then the other thing is there's an email address, options@theocc.com. That email address comes to our investor education desk where I sit with 3 other colleagues. Amongst the 4 of us there, we have over 100 years of industry experience. And what we do every day is answer questions and teach people about options. And that's all incredible. Of those resources, here's the other best part about it. All of those resources are available free of charge and on demand to the public because OIC is fully funded by our parent corporation, OCC.
Awesome.
So utilize those resources because that's why we're there. We're there to answer your questions. always keep in mind, we're not registered investment advisors, so we can't answer very like super specific questions about your position specifically. But I can tell you, and my colleagues can tell you how those options work and help you to understand how those things might play out in different ways and make better informed option decisions.
Awesome.
Yeah, and
Awesome,
you can
awesome.
find their address online if you want to send 50 pizzas to Matt.
That's
for
right.
lunch.
You can also do that if you'd like.
Okay.
Especially if you pay for them with Bitcoin. It's perfect.
That's right.
Full circle. It's all full circle.
All right, Matt. Well, we're going to see you in September again. I know that
Yep.
we have it. It's on the calendar. I don't know off the top of my head, but we're gonna see you again in September with another
September
great
18th,
topic.
I think, is when I'm coming back the first time. But
Perfect.
yeah, we can do this. Like I'll be back. Don't worry.
Awesome.
Thank
Great
you,
job.
Matt.
Thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
Molly, we're going to cut it there. We went long, but that's okay.
I know.
He's a good dude, right?
We rolled it.
We rolled it. All right, Matt. See you, man.
Yeah, thanks a lot.